Okay, everybody, what we have got below us is the Roman Forum. Not to be confused with the Imperial Forum, that's mostly over the road. That is from the time of the emperors, the time of the empire. This is the original Forum from the time of the Republic. So, from the Arch of Septimius Severus on the left, right down to the Arch of Titus on the right, that we've already had a look at, the Via Sacra runs all the way in between, the Sacred Road. And if we're talking about religion, as we were earlier, this is where we have the original pagan temples to the original pagan gods, or at least the remains of them. So in the bottom left-hand corner, we have the Temple of Saturn, where every year the Romans would celebrate the most fantastic party of Saturnalia. And if anybody here still celebrates New Year's Eve with a party, you are actually celebrating Saturnalia, because it's one of the many pagan festivals that we have just taken for ourselves, changed the name. But as well as the Temple of Saturn, on this site we have the Temple of Concord, the Temple of Castor and Pollux. Right opposite us there, we have the Temple of Romulus, because Romulus was actually deified, made into a god. And those bronze doors are the only originals in the whole of Rome. But most important, right under the terrace here, we have the remains of the Temple of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, of the fireplace. And just in front, you can see the statues and the ornamental pools of the House of the Vestal Virgins. Now, the House of the Vestal Virgins was a palace, and the virgins had great privilege and luxury at a time when women really didn't have many privileges at all. So maybe that's one of the reasons why their wealthy patrician families would give their daughters to the house between the ages of 6 and 10, and they would stay there for 30 years. Now, they only had one job. That was to keep the eternal flame of Rome alive. That was it. Because if you remember, the Romans were really superstitious. They believed as long as the sacred eternal flame was still alight, that Rome could never fall. But that if it went out, there would be death and destruction. So, while they had huge privileges, for instance, if a convicted criminal just walked across their path, the criminal would be pardoned. But if they ever let the eternal flame go out, they would be publicly flogged in the Forum, and if they ever broke their vows of chastity, they would be buried alive in a tomb and left to die. So as with most jobs, there were pros and cons. But if we switch from religion to politics, the building in the top left-hand corner, you can probably see a little better if you come that way, still standing, is the Curia. And that is where the Senate used to meet every day. That's where they used to introduce new laws, and where they tried to introduce democracy, something else that came over from Greece. But the reason this building is still intact is that it is not the original Curia, because the original, along with many of the temples and basilicas on this site, have been destroyed by fire several times over, the fires that spread from the Suburra. And it wasn't until the time of Julius Caesar, when he had such huge spoils of war, that he rebuilt the Curia and many of the temples and basilicas. In fact, the Basilica Aemilia, right next door to the Curia, is where the money changers used to work. And we know that because in the stone floor, you can still see the original coins fused into the stone from the heat of the fire, which I think is amazing. But what I don't want you to think is this is a load of old ruins. I know it is a load of old ruins, but I want you to think this was the religious heart, the commercial heart, the political heart, and the social heart of Rome. This is where Julius Caesar held a banquet for 22,000 people when he was trying to get some support. This is where the gladiatorial contests used to be held before they built the Colosseum. So, the Romans said, we will transform Rome from a city of stone to a city of marble. And they really did. And all the eyewitness reports from here will say how visitors said just how grand it was. But there is one unusual temple on this site. Right there, we have the temple of Antoninus and Faustina. And it's unusual for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the pillars at the front. Can you see the marks at the top? The rope marks where they were tried to be pulled down, because it wasn't only the commoners who recycled building materials, it was also the popes. And when the new St. Peter's Basilica was to be built, an awful lot of marble was taken from this site. Luckily for us, they tried to take those pillars, but they failed. But the other reason this is unusual is because Antoninus was an emperor. His temple shouldn't be on this site. But when his beloved wife Faustina died, Antoninus went to the Senate and said, please, make my wife into a goddess. Please deify her. And apparently a number of the Senate knew Faustina quite well. So they said, by all means, put up a temple, which is why this is here. But has anybody heard of Antoninus? Because not many people have, and that's because he was a good emperor. He didn't kill his mother, he didn't marry his sister, he didn't make his horse into a senator, and he died a natural death, which was really unusual. So, we are going to leave right now for our last stop. Please come back later to take your pictures. Everybody with me? We're coming this way.